So the hardest part of the day is just getting this thing set up.
Why is that?
On the phone, I can never find it. I can't read the comments anyway. It's pointless, but I like to, I don't know. I guess I like to watch
All
it.
right, there we go. Okay. We're going to do live chat. Oh, all right, we are live.
All right, we did it. Congratulations, you did it. Now, if I can only find the damn thing. There we are. Okay. Okay. That's better. Anyway, all right, there we go.
Oh, good morning,
Yeah.
Caleb.
Caleb's up early today. Up and at 'em.
Caleb, I see your Mets are doing awesome.
Mets are good. Mets are
Yeah.
good.
I mean, I kind of have a soft spot for them because of Lindor. He's still one of my favorite players. So
I'm just glad they took Soto from the Yankees. Admittedly, I honestly,
yeah.
I think Mets daughters are probably the NLCS. That'd be cool. We'll see.
Frank, good morning, Frank. Good morning, James. Frank says, happy 161 of Battle Yellow Tavern. We were just talking about that this morning. And then I didn't do a post about this yet on my own Facebook page, but I plan to later. I was looking into, again, about John Huff. And I think some new research has been done about him because now there's two John Huffs that apparently appear that are around the same age as the guy that shot him. One of them was born in New York and one of them was born in Canada. But I know research for the longest time has shown that the John A. Huff that lived in Michigan that allegedly shot Jeb Stuart was from York, Canada, so the Toronto area. And yeah, Caleb, I agree. Yellow Tavern is not Jeb's best day.
No, I mean we did an episode. Yeah, we did an episode on that a while ago. That Yellow Tavern, yeah, and it's funny because you're coming into this anniversary time with all these dates, but Yellow Tavern's a fascinating one. And it was really spurred on by the hatred between Phil Sheridan and George Meade. That's why it happens.
Yeah.
And Grant wanted them to go in a timeout, get the hell away from me. Just think about you're in Grant's position. How much was that hate between those two that strong when you're willing to, right around the time of the wilderness, to let your entire cavalry go in the face of Robert E. Lee's army because you need to get these two away? Because then, and I know, taking care of Stuart was a big deal of it, but that's a risky move by Grant. That's one people don't give Grant enough credit for that. And that was it was a bad battle for Jeb, and that happens. I mean, but
well, I think he had lost his fastball by that point. And I was reading in Gelso's Lee biography. I got to the part about Yellow Tavern, and Gelso basically says Jeb was completely not ready for it. By that point, he was not the same Jeb Stuart that had been 2 years ago or whatever. But even then, I do think I've never been Jeb does not fall into my top 5 of Civil War Cavaliers at all. I mean, he's riding around with his red cape on he's, I don't know, whatever. I mean, he's good, but he's not Mosby. He's not John Hunt Morgan. He's not Grierson. He's not even, he's not Forrest either. He's good, but he would not fall into my top 5. But his death definitely Lee was inconsolable because I think he saw Jeb as kind of he was the same age as his kids, saw this kind of son, he was like a father figure to him. The other thing too is as you say with, yes, what did it take? How much drama was going on that Grant is willing to send away Sheridan? And I think it was I can only liken it to the drama that happens with teenagers. That must have been what it was like. It was just Meade and Sheridan are at each other. And Grant also uses that as fine, go chase Jeb down, go get him. And he does. And there was 2 people from the 5th Michigan. I think that was the cavalry that Huff was with. So Huff was a Wolverine. One of them was Custer. That said it was Huff that pulled the trigger. But of course, people say, no, it's disputed. How could you possibly know that? It's it very well could have been. But then Huff is going to die in mid-June of 1864 because he was shot during a battle, and he's buried in Armada, Michigan now. But no one will ever know 100% who shot Jeb, but we have 2 eyewitness accounts, one of them being Custer that says, yes, it was John A. Huff that, went up. Jeb was apparently, you could see him from a mile away because he had his red cape on and his hat
it'd be something if the next day Robert Lee went in the shower and Jeb was in the shower and the whole thing was a dream.
Oh, hey.
No,
Bobby from Dallas, the dream season.
But Huff runs by. I mean, it was probably the first drive-by shooting in American history. Think about it. He literally ran by, shot him, and kept going.
Yeah.
I believe the Huff story. We did a lot of research into the Huff thing
Mhm.
when we did that episode a year or so ago. And by all accounts, I mean, everybody wants credit for shooting the big dog. I mean, that's why look at Reynolds here at Gettysburg. That's why you always hear it's a sharpshooter, because they can't bear the
Yep.
thought of a grunt shooting down the general. And then so it had to have been I mean, that's a lot of it's a lot of credit for that.
But the thing
believe
with
the Huff story.
Huff is where he was from in Michigan, he was part of a local shooting club. He was known to be a very good shot. And when the Civil War broke out, he was like, you should enlist, you should enlist. So he enlisted in the cavalry, and he actually enlisted twice. He went home for a brief period of time, but then he re-enlisted. And Caleb says, you know, what's fascinating and frustrating about it is that Jeb totally could have avoided that confrontation and could have prevented his own death, desperation in a terrible moment. And he said that Jeb is cool, he likes him a lot, but he's overrated and not among the top five. His fame is partly due to him being part of the Army of Northern Virginia, and therefore he gets more attention.
Yeah.
And Caleb also asked, was Huff a member of a Michigan cavalry? Yes, I think it was the 5th Michigan.
Yeah, he was one of Custer's guys, right?
Yeah, he was with Custer. He was like an
So
article I read about him referred to him as a Wolverine.
The 5th to the 6th then, but probably the 5th. I think I remember it being the 5th. I mean, to me, admittedly, I haven't thought too much about Yellow Tavern, but until this morning we were talking about it again. But yeah, I think it was the 5th as you think about it.
Yeah. And Grant said that Hooker and Grant are the only commanders to really use cavalry in the East well. And then Christopher asked, was there a particular incident between Meade and Sheridan that led to their dislike for each other?
Yeah, right before the Battle of the Wilderness, there was a situation where Meade was this is right at the beginning of the Overland Campaign, and this is pre-Wilderness now, and they had an attack where Meade and Sheridan were gonna hit Lee, and Meade was there, Sheridan was late. And it turned out the whole thing fell apart because, I don't know if you know this, Mary, Meade had a little bit of a temper on. It's like you, right? And so Meade felt that Sheridan dicked him over, and he was late, and the whole attack fell apart. And then and from that point on, they just hate each other. And it was mostly Meade on Sheridan, admittedly.
Mm-hmm. Well,
but it was right. That could mean if that went down right, but if that happened the way it could have changed that entire Overland campaign. Yeah. Because it's similar to Meade. Don't forget, Meade thought he had Stuart over a barrel at Chancellorsville.
Yeah.
And now Stuart was in charge of infantry at this point because Stonewall got shot by his own men there. So Stuart's in charge of infantry, and Meade has him dead to rights, but because Hooker is concussed.
Yeah.
Or whatever the hell happened to him, he couldn't get the order, and so he had to miss an opportunity. So Meade always felt like he had the opportunity in a couple situations to bag them. And both times it was because of different reasons. But I think the Sheridan thing was inexcusable, and that was the big reason. I thought that was the genesis of really that situation. But no one liked Sheridan. I mean, he was that type of irascible type of prick. That's who he was.
Yeah. I mean, he did his job well. I mean, I don't like him either. And I think the other thing too is, Grant comes from the West, and it's one thing when you're General Grant coming to the East. It's another thing when you're bringing your cavalry guy and he thinks he's going to have all this pull and clout because he's been in the West, and because he's like, and some people don't like it when I say this, he's like Grant's little lapdog. Like and Grant in his eyes, same with Sherman,
Didn't Grant somebody hit you on that one time?
Oh yeah, someone got really offended. I referred to him as a lapdog. He was not. He was more than that. I'm like, he's a I'm like, just my opinion.
I remember that. I remember.
It's like when I referred to General Thomas as being Eeyore. That was meant to be a compliment. And someone said I should not be comparing these men to cartoon characters. Disrespectful.
Well, I'm comparing also Superman and superheroes, so I guess it's all kind of the same thing.
Yeah,
it's all good. It's all good, but it's all right. It's all right. It doesn't matter. But I think when you look at some of these things, and what's cool about this is really looking into the interpersonal relationships between some of these people. And Meade, as much as he was, he had a reputation of being grumpy and hard. He had that face, the snapping turtle thing. I mean, he was fair, but he was demanding. But the situation right before Wilderness with Sheridan was one that he wasn't going to walk that one back. That was the end. And that's, again, these people have been like around each other and for 3+ years now,
Yeah.
and wanting this thing to end. And it's like living in a house with a bunch of roommates. After a while, you're just going to get sick of each other and look for things to bring up. Um, but if you read, Chris Makowski has a lot of really good books on the Overland campaign.
Mhm.
I forget the name of the skirmish that, because it never really happened. But if you read one of Chris's books, from Emerging Civil War, he talks a lot about the Sheridan Meade relationship. So if you're
Yeah.
interested in reading about that, which was really the genesis of why Yellow Tavern happened, right? Everything
Yeah.
happens for a reason, and it's usually interpersonal reasons. But
Yeah.
check that one out. I'm blanking on it right now. Admittedly, I haven't really thought about it,
Chris
but
Makowski has a lot of good books.
no. And Chris is kind of the man when it comes to Overland campaign, especially Spotsylvania. Um, but yeah, he's a good dude. We've had him on here as well. He's a good guy. But
Yeah.
but check that out if you're interested in reading more about that Sheridan Meade relationship and how that went down. But that's the scoop with that.
James really appreciated your Spice Girls reference in the episode the other night.
Yeah.
Remember you said "shimmy to the left," the
Oh,
line from
God,
Spice
yeah.
World. And then Jeffrey said, "Who would the Spice Girls be of the Civil War? I think Sickles is a total baby Spice."
That's a good one. That's a good one. Baby Spice. Yeah,
Katniss Wilcox is cardamom spice. That's what James said.
yeah. I don't know where these things. It's pretty sad. Something like that would pop in my head at the last possible minute to say something like that. But yeah, I guess it would be. Spice Girls. I like the Spice Girl. I was always a sporty Spice guy. I think I
Sporty
liked her.
Spice. Yeah,
I think that she was my girl.
I like Sporty Spice and Victoria.
After the Bangles, the best all-female band of all time.
Yeah, they are. They're
No,
very
probably,
good.
probably not. I think you probably go Go-Go's or whatever. But anyway, yeah, some good Spice Girls talk. That's good stuff. But that's what Breckenridge did, though. That's what he did. Maybe he had the album.
Hal is on here from Littleton, Mass. And he was just asking when we do
Yeah.
these. So I said usually Saturdays, Sundays. Our friend Russ is on here from the other side of the tracks, coffee and cigar in hand.
Oh, good for you, Russ. Yeah, Russ is a good dude. We had some shenanigans with him over at Gettysburg Eddie's recently. He's a local towner and good historian, so it was good to have him on here.
Yeah.
But no, it's but I think going back to, I guess, Newmarket, talking about specifically how that went. And what's so funny about, not say funny about it, but I haven't spent a really amount of time researching John C. Breckinridge. Admittedly, I just haven't. I mean, about different battles. You talk about, Donaldson, Henry, and Shiloh, and how he pops up here and there.
Well, wasn't he the one that kind of like after Donaldson?
Well, him and Pillow, mostly
because they were like, we are wanted and we cannot be here.
Yeah, but I think it's fascinating when you read the skinny on a Breckinridge. And one of our friends admittedly does not like Breckinridge. He hates him more than he hates, he hates. And I
think it goes back to the whole Breckinridge was very much against Braxton Bragg, and Miranda and Caleb both said they enjoyed the episode. So thank you for that.
Oh, no, I appreciate that.
And he said that Caleb also likes Breckinridge, and he was a fan of Claiborne's. Breckinridge.
I'll tell you plain. When you dissect and analyze X's and O's, the whole thing of Breckinridge and Newmarket, there are not a lot of better individual battles by any general on either side than Breckinridge and Newmarket. I mean, he pushed every button perfectly. And when you look at how he did that, specifically with less men, with an army that was put together with Scotch tape, and not just the VMI kids, but you're talking about armies that were basically battalions. And he was able to, and what else, a very underrated thing he did is when his line was moving forward, when they passed the river road up to Maynard's Hill, heading towards the Bushong farm, he kept his artillery on the right flank moving with the infantry. That's brilliant, because now you create that enfilade fire. That's if you want to look at a battle plan 101 for success, look at Breckinridge and Newmarket. And because he would have beaten a lot of guys, because you can't fall back on the he was going up against Sigel thing, because Sigel's army wasn't that great either. But as far as a thinking man's battle, that was a thinking man's battle. That was not a throw everything against the wall and meat grinder thing. The way he was able to move his troops and kind of embellish his numbers the way he did, while he's also up front with the army. There's one story, that we talked a little bit about the Henkel house. Remember with the woman, and he knocks on the door, and he's the most, well, if you haven't heard the episode, he's a lot of the Battle of Newmarket took place in the town. If you go visit the battlefield, it looks like it's just on this big field, but it's really
It's worth a visit.
81 cuts right down the middle, kind of the way 270 cuts a Monocacy down the middle. Well, anyway, he's in the town and he's looking for a place to go on the roof to find the enemy, the Federals. It was rainy, it was cloudy, it was foggy. Spice Girls was playing, the whole deal, but he couldn't find them, so he ends up climbing on the roof to get up there, and he knocks on the door and she lets him up. But one story I forgot to tell was one of the reasons why he knocked on that door was the Hankels were big, like a lot of people in Virginia, they were very pro-Confederate. And Mrs. Hankel, who was 37 years old, she was, while the Union men were walking down the street, she had a bucket of boiling hot water and she was dumping it on them as they were going down the street.
Oh my
And
God.
if you go to the Hankel house, there's a plaque that has it's like a historical marker. If you look around the plank, you'll see a bunch of dents on the wall. It was from the Union soldiers with a rifle of their butts smashing to try to knock the door down to come to get her to stop dumping the water on. They couldn't get in, and then Breckinridge comes up and she lets them up. But it's just kind of one of those cool little civilian stories. That I had in my notes. I just for some reason forgot to say it, but it just those are the stories I think are just kind of cool when you study these things. Is how, and the fact that the Hankel house is still there on Lee Highway, they're right downtown, and you can see the rifle butt marks on the side of the wall.
Yeah,
from the Union guys telling them to knock it off and trying to. And I think it's cool. I don't care, but I think it's a neat story.
We have a question about Eli Lilly, who was with is it Wilder, I think, said, how much do you guys know about Eli Lilly's artillery service? I think he was with the 18th Indiana Light Artillery. And then
you're the Wilder girl.
His enlistment expired, but then he re-enlisted. In 1864, he resigned his commission and left the 18th Indiana. And then he joined the 9th Indiana Cavalry and was promoted to major. And I think he ended up getting captured.
Yeah.
And then he was released. But he's the founder, if you've heard of Eli Lilly, the pharmaceutical company, that's him.
Yeah, we talked about him.
Yeah. Yeah, but I don't know as much about his artillery service, and now I want to look more into it because I know of him being with one of Wilder's guys. But he's like an interesting guy to study too, just because like his post-war career is very interesting too, with the founding of the Eli Lilly company, which still is around today. Caleb says you, Darren, do a great job observing the small details at places.
Oh, I appreciate that. I think that's where the fun stories are, to be honest, because you can read about, the flanking maneuvers and blah, 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 but finding that the real cool, interesting stories, that's the ones I've always been fascinated by. But it's pretty cool though. It's pretty cool to kind of go, especially when you can still see, like when you go into some of these Civil War towns, like Sharpsburg or Gettysburg, or these places, and you can still see bullet holes, or here in Gettysburg, you can see a lot of soldier marks on the rocks and the buildings downtown where they carved their initials in. Somebody carved MF somewhere.
No, I didn't.
It's either you or a really bad swear.
I did not carve that. I did not. So Jeffrey says, can you imagine knocking on the door in the middle of fighting and there is Breckinridge, posh Spice, if you want to be my lovers, playing in the background?
That's probably exactly what happened. You think about it, Dr. Solomon Hankel, that's who lived in the house, and he's a physician. He's like 60 years old, and his wife was like mid-30s, 36, 37, so she's younger. And you can imagine she's living with this older doctor, knock on the door, the battle's going on, she's dumping hot water at people, the whole, you can just imagine seeing it. And so you knock on the door, and there's a commanding general. And according to her, the quote was, he was the most handsome man I ever saw. So she must have been smitten seeing Breckinridge coming up. And then he goes up the roof and he can't see. So he's hanging on the chimney and he's leaning over so he can see the Federals. And then he's yelling orders down below, pointing them out. That must have been a cool visual. I think,
they didn't do that in the movie, right? Because I would have been cool to see Jason Isaacs do that.
And then they start shooting at him. Someone sees him, and the bullets start ping, 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 and he's like, whoop, see you later. And he slides down, he goes out the door. But it's a neat story when you think about how upfront someone like him was, And again, but that's how Breckinridge was in Newmarket. He was able to direct his men. He had some good people with him. He had Eccles and Gabriel Wharton, but Eccles
Yeah.
had the belly rumbles, and so he was out. And so now you have George. Now you got George Patton, right? Who kind of ends up being kind of a superstar. Patton's going to get killed at Third Winchester, but at that point, he's this is kind of his proving ground.
Yeah.
Right. And he's over there with the 62 VA, and he's with these people beating the heck out of the 54th Pennsylvania with Imboden's guns. And you can just see the whole thing going. It must have been just like a slow rolling train roll, just rolling up the Union like a blanket. And the fact that they're up to their knees in mud, it's I guess when you can think about these battles and you look at the visuals, how they must have been, it's easy to kind of just imagine the plight of some of these guys, especially guys like the 118th Connecticut, right?
Yeah.
Company A and B, the rookies who were on the skirmish line, and
yeah,
they get scared to death by cattle being chased by a dog. They think it's the Confederates. They run like hell because
I mean, at that point, you're like, you're going to be up about anything, right? Miranda mentions that before COVID, they did a reenactment at Newmarket in the actual battlefield as it played out. And then Caleb said Jason Isaacs did a fantastic job of portraying Breckinridge. I thought he did really good too. And then James said Jason Isaacs, Tarleton.
Yeah, and he was also at Harry Potter.
Yep.
Right. Yes, he's a good actor.
Lucius Malfoy.
Lucius Malfoy. He does play, especially with a lot of the notes I read from the VMI cadets and some of the other things for this episode. They did capture him pretty well because he was a sympathetic fella, what he was. Mm-hmm. He kind of reluctantly
put the VMI kids
the VMI cadets. And like we said before, the movie gets it wrong a little bit because that was not the first time they were called out. It wasn't. Yeah. But they were kept in reserve for the most part. And this was the first time they obviously saw battle.
Yeah.
And if you go to Newmarket and you go to the Bushong Farm area, that farm and the ground around it is actually supported and funded by VMI to this date. So that's why it looks pristine.
Yeah.
You can go right on the right-hand side. There's a fence that was where the VMI cadets were huddled after they went around the farm. In the field of lost shoes area, they call it, where they marched and where they took von Kleist's guns, is right there. You can literally march that field. You can run up the slope and you get right to the plateau where the gun was, and yeah. right where Evans was up there with the flag. You can and that's what's great about a lot of these battlefields, especially in the Shenandoah. You can go and it's still pristine. You can still see exactly.
Yeah. I love
what Thomas G. Jefferson saw for your mortally wounded. You can see the exact site he did. That's what's neat about it. You can see Mount Jackson up there. You can see everything. Yeah. So if you've ever been to the Valley, you certainly do it. But Newmarket's a great battlefield. It's one that, and there's a lot of them. We were just at Third Winchester a week or two ago. Speaking of Patton, and that's another one you can go to. And it's only if you're the Gettysburg peeps in this area, you're talking an hour or two. That's all. It's what, maybe an hour 15 to Winchester.
Yeah, it's not that bad at all. And then Grant asked if the movie's worth watching, and Miranda and I both said yes.
Oh, it's absolutely.
Field of Lost Shoes is worth watching.
I mean, of course, it's going to be on the Lost Causey side, but
it's a little Lost Causey, but it's not.
But it is and it isn't. But of course, it's because it's told from their perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't make it. I mean, it wasn't. It wasn't as bad as Gone with the Wind or anything.
No, it's not.
No, but what I'm saying is that it's very fair told from a Southern perspective, because of course it's going to be. It's told from the perspective of John C. Breckinridge. It doesn't make the Union guys look evil or anything.
Franz Siegel's very much, he's shown as a guy that is brought back in. And again, he's clearly not knowing what to do. And I think, Siegel's an interesting figure too, because I did a lot of research about him going into this episode. And I used James Pulla's book, Under the Crescent Moon, which is about, it's all about the 11th Corps. And he's got a really good overview of Siegel before he took command of the 11th Corps. And I mean, the thing with Siegel is, he's involved he's one of the 48ers. So he's involved in those revolutions over in Germany, Prussia area in 1848. And the thing with him is that he always gets beat by forces that he outnumbered, but they were better trained. And that's what happens to him at Newmarket as well. He's just not, he's good at rallying the men. And I think he was a really good speaker. Like he had obviously spoke German and he spoke some other languages too. And he could command of the English language too. But when he came over, um, to the United States, he was already a celebrity because the German American papers had been reporting on his exploits as well as others too. Like there's quite a few 48ers that fight in the American Civil War. There's Carl Schurz, there's Schimmelpfennig, I think Krzyzanowski was one as well. Blanker, Louis Blanker, who was the first commander of what would become the 11th Corps. And then James said he just read what happened to Franz Siegel's daughter. She was murdered, and to this day, the murder remains unsolved.
Yeah, she was found in a trunk, wasn't she?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was New York City, wasn't it? Bronx.
Yep. Yeah, I think Bronx area.
Nothing good happens at the Bronx, Mary.
No.
Nothing. Okay.
Well, that's where Siegel's statue is.
No, that's not. That's on Manhattan.
Oh, wait, he's buried. Yeah, so Siegel's buried in a cemetery in the Bronx. But like, so then Siegel, Civil War, he's in St. Louis, and that's where he starts recruiting. And he's in the Trans-Mississippi Theater when William Nathaniel Lyon gets killed at the Battle of Wilson's Creek. Siegel takes over. And then at Pea Ridge, he has his best day in the Civil War, mans the artillery, likely should have stayed with the artillery. But because Abraham Lincoln knew who he was. And when he came east, that's when he gets, higher and higher command. And then after, Fredericksburg, he basically is like, well, I want more men. And they're like, no, you can't. And Halleck didn't like him. So Siegel ends up like resigning or kind of shoved off into office work. Henry Halleck shockingly doesn't like him. But then 1864 rolls around and you have the election. And Abraham Lincoln needed the German community vote again.
Right.
He brings Siegel back in purely for political reasons. And that's why it's Siegel at Newmarket.
Well, that was the thing too, is he needs the German votes. I mean, again, people think it's political. Of course, you think of Uncle Dan Sickles, right? But he was a good one. But you remember too, is in the heat of battle, he's trying to yell orders out. First Jacob Weddell, the first West Virginia, and he's yelling them in German. He's yelling to George Wells of the 34th Mass, the colonel, where to move, and in German. And I don't know too many mass people, Mary, who speak German.
No, and that's the thing, is he would get really like into it, and then he's like, all of a sudden he's probably back in 1848 commanding, and he forgets he's in the American Civil War or something. Grant said they should have just had Siegel recruiting the German soldiers because he was just not up to it on battlefield. I think he was up to it on battlefield as long as he had a few people above him and not commanding like he did not commanding like he did with the 11th Corps and like he did with Newmarket. That was not his strong suit at all. But nonetheless, he is still a very interesting individual to study. He's no Carl Schurz.
No, he's not. But I mean, he put his guys like Augustus Moore, his fellow natives, in charge. Augustus Moore, if you study South Mountain, if you study the Maryland campaign, Augustus Moore, he's basically South Mountain, actually Hagerstown, pre-South Mountain, and Newmarket is kind of where he shows up in history. But he's a guy who was trusted. He was the one who was put up front. He's got his commands as Ohio guys, Connecticut guys, and he ends up again with new guys. I mean, and we've mentioned this in the episode. The army that Siegel had, for the most part, were the people who were in charge of guarding the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. These were not Army of the Potomac veterans. These are people who, for the most part, had never fired their guns before. That 18th Connecticut, Henry Peel's guys, 600 guys, none of them even fired a weapon before. They're out front on the skirmish line, companies A and B, trying to slow the 30th Virginia down.
Yeah.
I mean, which end does this thing go? That's how it's Connecticut, so give them whatever Connecticut,
You were stuck in traffic.
But I mean, right? But this is what he had to deal with, and the fact that Siegel is not on the field yet. He's up in Woodstock, Vermont. Not Vermont, Woodstock, Virginia.
I was going to say, if he's in Vermont, that's a very bad situation. No. He may as well have been there.
Yeah, I can tell you about it. He's probably listened to Bob Dylan play at Woodstock a few more times before he came down. Different Woodstock, but he's down the valley, rather north. He's trying to make his way down. His army is all scattered. He's
Mhm.
herding cats down the Valley Pike, trying to get down there. Meanwhile, Breckinridge, he's on Shirley's Hill. He's got everyone lined up. He's ready to go. You got Wharton, you got Eccles, you got Imboden. You've got a good group. They haven't fought together either, but they're battle tested. Now he's sitting up there on Shirley's Hill waiting for Sigel to attack him.
Mhm.
Never happened, so he does the attack. But when you look at what Sigel's job was, we mentioned this in the episode, his job was simply to take the Confederates, Breckinridge, out of Stanton, Virginia,
Mhm.
have them move north, so George Crook, in his fantastic beard, can swing around and take Stanton to take the railroad. It was a
Yeah.
rope-a-dope. Um, and the plan works, but of course, Crook, he hears a rumor that that Grant got smoked at the Wilderness, and he's like, well, the hell with this. This plan's not going to work then. He doesn't take Stanton. He goes back in the mountains,
Yeah.
which is a huge missed opportunity. But Sigel did his job. He drew Breckinridge out of the city
Yeah.
to fight to free up the city. But Crook doesn't take advantage of it. But again, you could put a lot of generals in that spot, in Sigel's spot with that army. They probably get beat just as badly. That was just a great day by Breckinridge. It really was.
Oh yeah, yeah, and he doesn't get talked about too much. Russ mentions that Mount Jackson is an interesting little under the radar town. There's lots to see there.
That whole area is nice. We went down to Harrisonburg. We spent some time in that whole area about a few months ago, like last
Yeah.
fall.
Mhm.
We got to get back there soon too. And then if you go through the mountains the way back, there's some good breweries.
Yes, yeah, that one we went to. I think that the Shenandoah Valley would be the perfect place to escape to when Bike Week happens.
Yeah, no kidding. No, I thought we were gonna be in Mass that week.
No, we're there the week before
Oh, okay. I hear you.
for the
I
first,
hear
second, third, and fourth.
Okay. I'm just doing as I'm told.
Yeah.
Just here for the ride.
You booked the vacation.
I know, but no, but again, you can look at the big picture with this, and you can sit there and say, something, as bad as Sigel ultimately was, and it wasn't 100% his fault,
No.
because his army, never should have been put in that spot. He was not up to snuff. Lincoln screwed that up. He should not have put him in that spot.
No.
But he did his job, and he got the rebels out of where they were supposed to get out. But Crook is the one who really. I don't think Crook's even mentioned in that Field of Lost Shoes movie. I don't think he even gets a mention.
No, and like James is saying Crook's the real villain, and Grant said Crook is both overrated in the Civil War and the Indian Wars.
Yeah, Crook, I mean, it must have been the beard. Maybe that's why he was so popular, right? But again, the plan ultimately worked. It just wasn't done. And then, of course, Breckinridge gets sent east to help Lee with the Richmond, that area with Petersburg before he becomes, gets his cabinet position.
And they said,
war.
oh yeah, because he takes that. Seddon is still in January 65 because he's in the Lincoln movie. But I don't know if that timeline is accurate for that because Seddon was gone by February. And what's his face? Breckinridge had the position.
He took over right at the beginning. I mean, right at the end. But again, he's it's tough to really find a lot of fault with Breckinridge. Big picture versus a lot of the other ones. But I mean, his New Market battle plan was pristine. It was planned well. He had the benefit of terrain, but he also did a really, really good job. We said in the episode, he's coming down Shirley's Hill, and Augustus Moore is on Maynard's Hill, and he's watching. He sees the Confederates in battle line, these regiments coming down the hill.
Yeah.
They go into a swale where they can't be seen. This is where the Spice Girl thing comes, and they shimmy to the left, and then they come down. So he sees these armies coming down all these different directions. He's like, holy crap. He doesn't realize it's the same people. But that's what he does when it's raining and it's muddy and you can't see with the fog. All you see are these bayonets and these flags coming from everywhere.
Yeah.
He's able to kind of pants him. And I mean, he has some good people for the most part. Patton, he's normally would be in charge of this 22nd Virginia, but he's in the big chair now because Eccles is down. But he's got some good people. He does. But he's got a lot of battalions. He doesn't have enough men to make up regiments. He's got battalions. You're talking 400, 300 man, groups, less than 10 companies.
Yeah.
and he's able to pull it all together, you know.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it is. The
Mhm.
62nd was mounted infantry,
Yeah.
you know, trying to deal with that with the mud. It's impressive.
It's
It's
like the
impressive.
weather just really
Yep.
plays into this battle. Jeffrey says, are we sure Siegel's job wasn't to just be angry at David Arquette? Poor Arquette gave a really good performance in that movie.
Well, what's funny about I'm glad they put David Arquette's character. That was Henry Dupont,
Yeah.
and they embellish his role a little bit because Dupont was in the back the whole time. And what happened was when the Union finally withdrew back down the valley, back north, he was able to slow Breckinridge down to let them escape. But in the movie, he's kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
But I'm glad they put him in there because he was somebody. Siegel in his department of Western Virginia probably get bagged if not for Dupont.
Yeah.
Dupont's kind of a bigger version of, say, Charles Tilden here at Gettysburg,
Yeah.
except at a much larger scale.
Mhm.
But he gets some press in the movie. But if you go to New Market, you head towards Mount Jackson, where the Shenandoah River bridges, you can see where Dupont finally slowed down the role of the Confederates.
Yeah.
You know,
It's an interesting battle to study, and I'm glad that we did it, especially so close to the anniversary on the 15th as well. Um, like it was one that, I mean, I've seen Field of Lost Shoes a couple times, been to the battlefield, but never looked at it in depth. It gave me, like I said, I enjoyed looking into Siegel. I enjoyed looking into Breckinridge a little bit more, especially since, like, you know, me studying Breckinridge has been like Chickamauga, like that kind of thing. And I think it's coming from the perspective of Braxton Bragg. But I didn't know, Caleb mentioned earlier, that Breckinridge really liked Claiborne. And in some ways, when I think about it, Breckinridge at Newmarket reminds me a lot of how Claiborne would fight. Like very much able to think really quickly in a situation like that.
it would have been easy because he ends up putting John M. Bowden. Everybody knows him from cavalry, but he does a lot of artillery here,
Mhm.
and he's able to fire from across the creek. So really, when you look at how the whole game plan came together, it was a perfect situation. I mean, Breckinridge got bailed out because of Julius Stahl too.
Yeah.
Julius Stahl was in charge of the cavalry, and he does that. So if you go to the valley and you're going south to north, okay, there's two waterways, and as you go north, it kind of the land shrinks.
Yeah.
It kind of makes like a little, I don't know what the hell you call it, but it's like we said in the episode, it's like going from a 3-lane highway to two. You have to
Yeah.
kind of merge. So he bottlenecks the land, bottlenecks Breckinridge's guys. So it creates a really good field of fire for Siegel. And while that's being set up, Stahl sees that. Now again, you're talking about mud. You're talking about you're in a horse covered in. It's tough to go anywhere with these people on top of horses. What he ends up doing is charging right into the right flank of the Confederates, and when he does that, it screws the whole thing up for the Union. That's when the
Yeah.
chaos took place, and this is when Siegel is yelling in German and yelling at all the First West Virginia, the
Mhm.
34th Mass, because everything's falling apart. You can't see anything. And this is when Breckinridge has that final, now he's going to go forward. And this is when the 51st Virginia and everything happens when you're pushing on the Bushong farm. But he gets lucky though, when you look at the big picture with this, because while this is all going on, he ends up basically finding a gap that's going to be created in
Mhm.
between right around where the 30th Virginia sharpshooters are, a 300-foot gap in the Confederate line. And this is when he plugs in. First, um, he's going to plug in Charles Woodson's guys, right? But he's only got 60 men. Now he brings up the cadets to fill the gap, and that's really when the whole thing happens with the cadets.
Yeah.
But the whole thing happens because of Julius Stahl's cavalry charge,
Yeah.
and that wasn't in the movie. They left that out totally.
No, they
that
did.
was
There is stuff they left out of the movie. Like Jeffrey says, and I agree with this. When the moment needed it, Breckinridge was a true leader. I think the movie did a great job of showing how calm and calculated he was and how unprepared and reactionary the Federals were to it. James comments, Breckinridge was sent by Lee to secure the route to the valley. So did Lee have more confidence in him than others, or was it a last commander standing type of situation at that point?
If he had a lot of, if he had a lot of support with him, he would have been with him in Petersburg. So I don't want to say it was bad, but he had to have someone in Stanton, because the railroad that connects Stanton to Richmond is a direct shot. He had to have someone he trusted, but he wanted his big dogs with him fighting Grant. So he was probably your second best reliever in the bullpen, is what it was. But that's what happens. Newmarket happens. Lee goes, holy crap, look what this guy just did. Now he brings Tim to Petersburg.
Yeah.
So it was almost like Newmarket kind of basically proved to Lee that he was one of the big dogs.
I think the Newmarket is like Breckinridge's redemption from everything that had happened to him. And I think it was James who made a comment that his politics before the war they definitely factor in him getting into trouble early in the war because he basically wanted by the Federals for what because he was VP.
Yeah, but at this point, though, but at
1864, it doesn't matter. But 1862, 1861, his politics definitely are factoring in. Oh, wow. Michael is on here from Australia. Good evening.
Australia. How you doing?
That's cool. Our friend Noelle is on here too. And she said, awesome Newmarket episode. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Noelle. Appreciate it. Noelle's cool.
Noelle is she knows her Mill Springs.
No, absolutely. Mill Springs, Zollicoffer, tough one. That's what George Thomas really makes his name.
Yeah. You wouldn't know it though, because Lincoln was like, "Oh, we can't have the Virginian's name on the front cover."
He was going to be in the centerfold, the New York Times.
Could you imagine the centerfold?
He was, and then Lincoln put the kibosh on it.
Probably would have been like that George Costanza.
That's probably where we got the Rock nickname, as I think about it.
Oh my God.
See, this is what happens. I know, but it is what it is.
But I mean, really, like you think of Thomas, like he was supposed to be on, what is that magazine that was really Harper's Week?
Harper's Weekly.
Harper's Weekly.
Yep.
He was supposed to be on the front cover, and Lincoln was like, nope, we can't do that. He's from Virginia. And he might still turn on us. Like that was the attitude towards him. Which and Thomas is like, I didn't go on the other side. Like I'm fighting. I'm a unionist. And I think that's too why he had that reaction he did over, when he's charged with the National Cemetery in Chattanooga, and someone's like, do we need to bury these guys by states? And Thomas is like, I'm tired of states' rights, mix them up.
Yeah, no, it's true. That's true, absolutely.
Like that was such a good response from him, because he was just, I think, done at that point. And Grant asked, was Breckinridge underutilized on the battlefield during the war? I think
I was not really. The dude was everywhere. He was at Shiloh. He was at Stones River. He was at Chickamauga. He was at Chattanooga. He disappears for a little while, admittedly, and then he ends up back in Newmarket because he's put in the Valley.
Yeah.
Because Stonewall Jackson had, for the most part, with the earlier Valley campaigns, had pushed the Union out. This is the whole Kernstown, the Nathaniel Banks, that whole thing. Jackson finally pushes the Union out. Now TJ is going off with Lee. He's gonna end up later on, after he gets back from Chickamauga, Chattanooga, being put into Stanton, and he's gonna sit there for a while. And he was a good custodian. I mean, he never really was the big dog at any of these battles, but he was at the battles. But after Newmarket, he ends up at Cold Harbor almost immediately. He ends up at Monocacy, Mary. I don't know if you know he was at Monocacy.
Yeah.
All of it. He's all the way through towards the very, very end. So he's kind of everywhere, but he's in a lot of small battles. Places like Bull's Gap, the Battle of Marion, the big reenactment. Everyone's a big no. But he's at these small little battles in Virginia later. But he was a politician, and he was someone who was a really good administrator. And so Newmarket is really where he showed that he could be a good battlefield guy.
Yeah.
And at that point on, Lee definitely utilized him a lot more. There's no question about that, because he was at all these places afterwards. But again, if you haven't studied Newmarket, if you haven't been there, but if you study it, you realize this is a guy who was playing chess, right?
Yeah.
While Siegel's eating the pieces from, Chutes and Ladders.
That's such a good way to put it.
But that's what he's doing, though, because he knows, I've got a smaller army. I've got a big reserve group. And it wasn't all cadets, but I've got a lot of reserves. I've got battalions versus regiments. I don't have as many people. And I have no idea what the union's going to bring on me, but I know they want Stanton, and I know Crook is out here somewhere too. He's able to pull it off together. All together. And so, if you're looking at when you're looking at a top 5 all-time individual performances by a general, you got to put Breckenridge in Newmarket.
Yeah.
You have to. You have
And
to.
that's sometimes because these smaller battles get overshadowed by the bigger ones, but this is sometimes where you see these guys that we don't talk about as much, like Breckenridge, where they have their moments where they are like, wow, they're just as good as in the
what's
bigger
funny
battles.
though is kind of like the old phrase: you win the battle, you lose the war. Seal getting pantsed by Breckenridge began that domino thing, because now Grant's like, F this. Now, you bring in David Hunter,
who fails
miserably. He does. But then finally he puts in Sheridan, because so Sheridan finally clears the valley out. But at the end of the day, Breckenridge's success at Newmarket would ultimately lead to eventually Sheridan being put into, finally, for Grant saying, I'm done with this, enough.
Yeah.
So he did well, but he probably, like I said, he won the battle, but he lost the war, because Grant finally realized he needs somebody who knows how to tie his shoes to put in the valley.
Poor Sigel.
Well, no, but it goes back. I mean, my fellow Walthamite Nathaniel Banks couldn't get it done. Sigel couldn't get it done. David Hunter couldn't get it done. He's too busy chasing McCausland around, right? And now you end up with a guy who's finally going to do it. He's finally going to take control. Even he almost screws up Third Winchester, though. But he's finally able to push the valley down, Cedar Creek, Fisher Hill, that whole thing, to finally secure the valley. And once the valley's secured, the clock is ticking for the end of it for Robert E. Lee, because he knows the blockade is done.
Yeah.
Wilmington has fallen. You got no supplies, right? The DQ cards are gone, right?
Yeah. DQ cards.
And now when the valley falls to Sheridan, he's got no food. Don't forget, Lee's going to places like, moving west, going to places like Farmville to find food.
Yeah.
And there's that place he gets there, and he thinks the food wagon's there, the trains, he opens it up and it's all ammo. And it just breaks his heart, because he knew they were done. And that's because the valley fell. And that valley fell because Sheridan did it, because the other guys couldn't.
Yeah.
If Sigel had been good enough to keep them kind of just fighting and keep it going, he wouldn't have had to do that. I mean, this is just my opinion. I mean, realistically, but looking at the track record, he does quickly go from Sigel to Hunter to Sheridan in about a 4-month period.
Yeah, it's very quick turnover for command. Miranda liked your description of Breckenridge playing chess and then Sigel eating the chutes and ladder pieces.
Well, that's kind of what it is. It's kind of true, though.
Caleb mentions that Breckenridge was a quiet supporter of Cleburne's proposal to enlist the slaves in the army in exchange for freedom.
Yeah, I think Breckenridge, because he was a politician, even though he was under Buchanan as VP, I think a lot of these guys, I find that a lot of the non-military West Point politicians, the thing they did well is they saw the big picture well. Right?
Yeah.
Versus a lot of these generals were so focused on the small picture. Right.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at a Claiborne, who wasn't really a politician, but he wasn't a West Point guy. Breckenridge he realized, what is the best way to win this? Now, he was smart enough as a politician, or I should say not dumb enough, to put something on paper and saying, here, everybody sign this. Let's get a petition together, like Claiborne did. But I think he realized quietly that was probably the right call. But again, who's to say that would have worked anyway? But at least they're thinking, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, Claiborne, he had that petition written down, or not petition, he had that emancipation written down. And then what's his face, Shot Pouch, is like, you're in trouble. I'm sending it to Richmond. And Claiborne's like, go ahead. I want them to see it.
I'm surprised Shot Pouch Walker like a fun guy.
He seems like a miserable.
Shot Pouch Walker's a guy who sits on your deck on his lawn chair and yells at you when your grass isn't cut. You're a neighbor. And he sits out there with his black socks and his sandals and his white t-shirt. That's who that's
all I'm picturing now.
That's what I picture. That's him. A miserable guy. Just nobody got shot all the time, but he couldn't kill him. They finally got him. They finally got him. But
yeah, he just and he just seems so miserable. Like, he's sitting in that meeting with Claiborne, which is obviously Shot Pouch is the last person that should be there, because he and his mother owned a bunch of slaves.
Yeah, well, it's not unusual. A lot of family
And then
people.
everybody, like Joseph Johnson is like saying to Claiborne, like, you need to stop. This
Mhm.
does not leave this room. And then Shot Pouch sends the thing to Richmond. Davis gets it and puts it in the back of his like filing cabinet. And it's not found, it's not known that Claiborne did that for many years. Like it was kept quiet.
Yeah, well, they did a good job trying to keep that quiet. But again, the important people knew about it. We've talked about that before. He definitely hit that glass ceiling, you know.
Oh yeah, like definitely. And like oh, Freedom Forever's on here and said they live in the Shenandoah Valley near Newmarket. Enjoy all your shows. Thank you. This is my second time catching a live show. Thank
Oh,
you. Glad to have you
well,
here.
thanks for coming. Yeah, here, come back often. We've been talking a lot about the valley this week, and especially today. So that area is a first of all, it's a gorgeous place. The
Yeah.
Shenandoah, absolutely beautiful place to
It
go. A lot
reminds
of
me a lot of Vermont.
yeah, I guess a little bit. You know, it certainly is. But that whole area where you go, we went to Harrisonburg and Newmarket, that whole place is just a fun. And people don't realize, especially people up north, how big the valley is.
Yeah.
Three times the size of Rhode Island.
Yeah.
I mean, 25% of the landmass in the state of Virginia is the valley. That's a huge area. And again, you're talking just in the Civil War, in 4 years, 320 engagements, 20 battles. They had a skirmish every 4 days for 4 years somewhere in the valley.
Yeah.
That's like the Fallujah of the Civil War, if you think about it, or like
Yeah.
the Gaza Strip or some damn place. That's what that is. It's always was always being fought about. And the rebels held it for almost the entire war. And it's no surprise, as soon as they lost it, the war basically came to an end.
Mhm.
You lost it. That's the whole thing, you know.
Yeah. Andrea mentions Vermont's beautiful, and that's where Barlow's father was born in Windsor, Vermont. Vermont
Okay.
is we went up there last year after I graduated to go up to Burlington to see like Howard's grave, and we saw the church where he went and also where his funeral was. So that was really cool to see that. But Vermont is beautiful. We want to get back up there because we want to go to St. Albans to see
Yeah, that'd be
some.
cool. That'd be cool to go up there and see some of the Sarah Slater stuff, the Veiled
Yeah.
Lady Mary.
Yeah. And while
See.
we're there, we can go to Montreal
Oh yeah.
and go see where Jeff Davis used to live. I know where it is. There's no plaque there anymore, but it's like in a mall now, or like it's a Hudson's Bay Company store, which I don't know if that'll be open anymore because they filed for bankruptcy.
Oh, well, there you go. There you
Open
go.
since the fur trade, and they
Yep.
filed for bankruptcy.
No. Yeah. Well, that's part of the issue of Montreal, I guess. Bigger problems, I think.
Yeah, well, that's where a lot of the Canadians went. That's where kind of the Confederate government had kind of its satellite government. Like Jeff Davis's brother, I think, was up there doing stuff.
I know a guy who used to go up there and torture the Montreal Canadian fans at hockey games.
And get your Molson X.
Yelling, yeah, during my Molson export,
Yep.
yelling 4 letter words, and to Montreal fans. Montreal's a fun city, no question
Mhm.
about that.
Yeah, and lots of and near the Quebec border, Quebec Ontario border is Cornwall, Ontario, and that's where the Canadian monument for the Civil War is.
Mhm.
And it remembers both the Union and the Confederates. That Canada, because Canada had it was mainly Union that Canadians the side they would have fought for, but there was some like Solomon Secord, surgeon here at Gettysburg, were part of the Confederate Army as
Mhm.
well. And we are going to be doing a episode close to the anniversary of Gettysburg about Canadians in the Civil War.
Yeah, that'll be one. We got a lot of cool stuff coming. I see Andrea on here. We'll be doing
Yeah,
an episode on Barlow pretty soon.
yeah.
And I was talking to someone yesterday who's a bigger Barlow fan than she is. If that's even possible. I couldn't believe it. So we'll definitely have that conversation. Um,
We also have our next episode is going to be about John Gibbon.
yeah, Gibbon, that's another one. And, we'll talk a lot about him, especially he's obviously interested in a lot of different ways too. Because he's someone who got around a little bit, and he was a good, solid political guy in Teedom, South Mountain. I mean,
Yeah,
he's somebody. Um, it's funny. What's funny though, he gets credit for the Iron Brigade in Antietam,
yeah,
and what they weren't the Iron Brigade in Antietam; they were the
no.
Black Hats.
Mhm.
And it's funny is I don't know if you know this. I had to correct someone yesterday.
Ooh.
I know I had to do that actually to some rando. that it was not the Iron Brigade. It was the Black Cats. The Iron Brigade was Walter Phelps's New Yorkers at that point. It wasn't until
Yep.
1863 when they left, they took the nickname the Iron Brigade.
Yeah.
But the Iron Brigade in Antietam was Walter Phelps.
Yeah.
So I learned something to somebody yesterday, Mary. But he's a fantastic study though. He famously has that issue with
Hancock.
with Hancock at Gettysburg, right?
That's a really interesting issue because when I was, God, be 8 years ago now, I was doing a lot of research into Gibbon. And there comes a point in late 1864 where he takes a leave from the army, and it was not for any physical injury. So it sounds like it was more, probably today would be diagnosed as having PTSD, I think. And when he comes back, he's no longer with the Army of the Potomac, but he's with the Army of the James.
Right.
And I think that has something to do with the falling out, that because he had a falling out with Hancock. And the thing with Gibbon is he is described as this guy that he is going to tell you the truth no matter how brutal it is. And he doesn't deal with BS. And I think if he was questioned on anything, he's going to bite back. Like this is a guy that I don't know why he didn't have higher command. I don't know why when you look at Gibbon, you're like, why was this guy not commanding a corps?
Well, I mean, we've talked, you and I have walked the battlefield here at Gettysburg about Gibbon and Hancock many times, and have our own conversations about that whole thing.
Well, I think some of it factors into that Gibbon was not kind of like Buford in a way that he didn't advocate for himself. Like that's why Buford, it took him a long time to get to where he was, because he was not one to say like, oh, hey, like blah, blah, blah. I need, I want this command or whatever. He was not out there advocating for himself as much. But I mean, this is a guy who during Pickett's charge, he was up because he had there were so many men taken down from his artillery that he had to go up and he was giving directions to them. So he was probably closer than he probably should have been. And that's why he's wounded. And you can see the witness tree. It's called the Gibbon tree. And it's painted into the cyclorama as well. There's pictures when the artist Philip Pitot was taking pictures, he took a picture and that tree is there and you can still see it today. It's just down, just a few yards away from where Gibbon's statue is.
Yeah.
And then he wrote the artillerist manual. He's a very hard fighter, and granted, Gibbon was better than old Oliver. No, they were very different.
Yeah, I mean,
different guy. Gibbon did not like Oliver Otis Howard I think for the religious reasons and also politics as well. Howard's an abolitionist. Gibbon is not. He is not an abolitionist.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's I mean, the problem with Howard, I was talking about this about someone yesterday too, about Howard, actually, ears are burning, was he gets a lot of bad historical memory from Chancellorsville. He gets completely unfairly blamed for Gettysburg, and they tie the two together somehow.
Yep.
But they're just different people. They just are. And the religion thing was a big part of it. I mean, Gibbon, he's a different type of guy. There's no question. But at the end of the day, only one of the two commands an army. And it wasn't Gibbon, right?
Yeah.
So, but again, that's the reality of it. But again, you talk about different people and talking to specifically about how a lot of these people grew into 1863.
Yeah. And they had to do so very quickly.
Well, Antietam is a great study for a million different reasons, because it really was the fact that when you realize that not one corps commander at Antietam was a corps commander at Gettysburg and how they changed. Yeah. And you saw how, you had guys like Howard, who was a brigade commander under Sedgwick.
Yeah.
Right. And the second corps of all things, Howard in the second corps. Can you imagine? Right. But he ends up following Sedgwick into the West Woods while everything kind of goes off kilter. But when you see how some of these guys like Barlow, who ended up at the Sunken Road, versus some of these guys with people like Israel Richardson.
Yeah.
And then you have the whole Irish Brigade thing of how these names kind of come up all the time. And just kind of see what they learned and what they took to the next thing.
Yeah.
That's how they do it. I mean, you have a corps where you have literally one you have three brigades marching in column 1, 2, 3, and they're all messed up on the other end. And how those commanders learned. Howard learned a lot at Antietam. There's no question
he did. And I think when you look at Howard, like I used to think that Ezra Church, how he was at Ezra Church was completely because of Chancellorsville. But now I think it's because of what happened to him too at the West Woods, that he's taking what he learned in both those battles and he's realizing this terrain is similar to West Woods and this situation is similar to Chancellorsville. And this is why I need to constantly be protecting my flanks. Mm-hmm. And I think I think he thought a lot, like a lot of them did after the battle. What could I have done differently? Claiborne did that a lot too. And that's why Claiborne made a lot of the changes he did post Shiloh, like with having sharpshooters to unfortunately kill the artillery horses. But you have like someone like Howard who is learning, and he's not this like, I don't want to say aggressive, but he's not a Hancock and he's not a Gibbon, but that doesn't make him any less. He's a different type of commander, and it took him a little bit more to grow. But when he was given command of the army, and I think the thing is that Sherman trusted him and he wasn't being questioned. Like Sherman's like watching him at Ezra Church and he's saying, do you really need to be doing this? And Howard's like, yeah, I do. And Sherman's like, all right, you got this. And Sherman let him do his thing.
Yeah.
And that's going to give, and no, he doesn't have a great day at Pickett's Mill, but they all have bad days. But I think, when you're looking at someone like Howard, he commands that army of the Tennessee and he does it really well. Like he's a good army commander.
We'll talk. Well, obviously, we're going to have Andrea on an episode next month to talk about Barlow. And we're going to talk a lot about Spotsylvania. We're going to talk a lot about Antietam besides Gettysburg and that stuff like that. But she's a big fan. But even she doesn't have a daughter named Barlow Arabella. I'll tell you that.
Is the daughter's name Barlow Arabella?
Barlow Arabella.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So you better be a Barlow fan. If that girl better know her history when she grows up, because she's
it's really cool. Like I think when you get outside of the Gettysburg bubble, and we are realizing this living here, that these generals that don't have a good reputation here have a much better reputation. They're seen as very different outside. Like Howard and Barlow have a definitely very different reputation at Antietam than they do here. Howard has a different reputation in the Western theater than what he does here, because here, unfortunately, the history of Oliver Otis Howard ends on July the 3rd.
Well, right. There's no question about that. There's absolutely no question about that. And I unfortunately, it's just people get typecast. Michael Richards will never be anything besides Kramer. Yeah. Right. That's just the reality.
Daniel Radcliffe will never be anything but Harry Potter. When you think about it.
Well, exactly. But I mean, that's what happens. A lot of the guys, especially in history, get typecast, especially when you have people who root for generals like they root for sports teams. Mm-hmm. I ain't got a favorite general. I don't care, right? I hate everybody there. Miserable Bostonian.
Right? I mean, admittedly, I like to study Howard more than any of the others, but I don't know, there's stuff about him that I relate to. And I love reading the letters he wrote to his wife, because it shows a side that, like, I've heard people say Howard didn't have a sense of humor. It's like, well, read the letters he wrote to his wife, read his memoirs. He's got the typical Maine dry sense of humor. And if you're from the Midwest, you might not get that what he's saying is he's actually taking a jab at somebody, but he's doing it with humor. And he is very self-deprecating as well in his letters to his wife. He makes jokes about himself, and he does that in his memoirs as well. But the other ones that I like to study, Hiram Granberry, Claiborne. I'd like to learn more about Lucius Polk. The bishop's nephew.
You can go down rabbit holes with pretty much anybody, but I think everybody deserves their due as far as history goes, to look into them and see what their strengths and weaknesses are. But I think what we were saying before with this is too many people hit that stop. They either like a guy perfectly or hate him eternally, based on whatever. And there's a lot of people like that. But at least they're studying the stuff. I mean, at least they're doing that, right? So at the end of the day, who cares, right?
Yeah, and MJ mentions that Howard was quite the artist in his letters to his kids, especially before he lost his right arm. But he would draw pictures, and they remember he did that one, like, who is this? It's his wife. And then he drew a self-portrait of himself.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. But I mean, that's the whole thing, though. Is you can study this, and especially social media, you'll see people fight to the death over these people,
Oh, yeah.
and it's like, you know what? I've said this before. I'll say it again. If you had a chance to sit down and have dinner with one of these people, you wouldn't like them. You wouldn't. There's a
Yeah.
reason why they're major generals or they're lieutenant generals. You know, again, we went to a thing last night at the film festival, and so and they were talking about Ike Eisenhower,
Mhm.
and it was interesting because they were trying to get a this is a very obviously a very high ranking general in the United States military, become president, the whole deal, but you had two people talking about him, his personality,
Mhm.
with his granddaughter.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this before. It was interesting. And one was Dr. Craig Simons.
Yep.
We've had him on the podcast, and he's a great historian. He wrote the
Great
Claiborne
Claiborne
book.
bio.
But
God, I wish I had known he was over at the Adams County Historical Society yesterday, because I would have taken the Claiborne
right,
bio over and got him to
right.
autograph it.
But he's a big Navy guy, and you had a moderator who's a professor at Penn State Altoona, and in the middle was Susan Eisenhower, and watching the moderator and Simons go back and forth about Eisenhower's personality, and she's sitting there kind of like, I kind of knew the fella.
Yeah, and
So
she just has to kind of sit there because it's a conversation, right?
The reason why I'm bringing this thing up is that we're talking, like historians talk about these people, about presentations, about what they do and how they've read, how they've studied, but we don't know them.
No.
But that was interesting and unique last night, because there was someone there who literally was sitting on his lap watching Angels on the Outfield.
Yeah.
What was apparently his
The
favorite
movie from 1951, which is really cool. And of course, you're like, that movie wasn't made till the 90s. And I'm like, no, it's a remake.
It, you know, but I mean, what I'm trying to say was that it's easy to read, no matter, you can read everything on a subject, on a person, and you're never going to know them personally.
No.
You're going to get ideas because you're getting skewed agendas from either side.
Yeah.
And watching them go back and forth talking about how he was with his men, how he was with this, and she's kind of sitting there kind of going, you know,
yep.
And she was good. She didn't correct anybody, but
I enjoyed listening to her.
It was a weird flex because it was hearing two people. It's like hearing two people talk about your grandfather.
Yeah.
From what they've read versus you.
Who knew him.
I mean, they didn't tell her she was wrong or anything, but it was watching her facial expression. She was kind of like, yeah, I guess. Well, he was, but we'll never get that opportunity with a guy like a Hancock or a Gibbon or a Howard or whoever. But I mean, I guess the reason why I brought this up is that what you study isn't always the reality. It's what you make of the reality.
Yeah, it's how you interpret what he's writing. And that's why I like to go to the letters that Howard wrote, because we're getting how he was with his wife, which is an interesting perspective. Humor and History is on here. And they say, I love studying the lesser known generals. And I said, yeah, Lew Wallace is definitely one of the lesser known ones I like to study because he's misunderstood. But even then, there's other ones that are, like Claiborne's subordinates that I mentioned earlier, like Granbury, Lucius Polk, Govan, like them, because they are some of the best subordinates in the Western theater. Studying them is interesting. And yeah, there are a lot of lesser known generals like Breckinridge, because he's not in any of the big, huge battles. Well, I mean, Chickamauga, I guess, is Henry and Donelson.
Well, yeah, but he wasn't the commander, though. I mean, he was a subordinate. Now, Breckinridge should be somebody who is bigger known.
Yep.
But again, no one knows who the hell James Buchanan's vice president was, right?
No.
People don't even realize who Truman's vice president was. No one studies that. But again, he's somebody who I think was there. He was the ultimate political general.
Yeah.
And so for Lee and especially guys like Braxton Bragg, who he didn't get along with, okay, a lot of people didn't like Bragg. You know why? Because he sat with his black socks in his lawn chair with his White Owl cigars, yelling at the neighbors, get off the lawn, kind of like Etzkorn does, right? but he drew a personal issue, and so but once he finally got his shot in Newmarket, turns out the dude can general a little bit, right?
Yeah, yeah, which is shocking considering some of the way he is sometimes portrayed. Humor and History says, I love learning about General Zollicoffer.
Zollicoffer reminds me of that dude in The Simpsons, the scientist. You know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about? The
yep,
big blind, because he was blind as a bat, the big
yep.
Coke bottle glasses, that big white jacket. And he's riding at Mill Springs, right? With his white jacket, blind, runs into the Union line and gets shot. Yet, some people think he was murdered.
Oh, that whole thing when I was like, dude,
If I,
he's
if
not
I, okay,
murdered.
if I put a blindfold on and I go running into the highway and I get hit by a car, the car didn't murder me, unfortunately, right?
No.
So it's funny when you read these certain things. But Zollicoffer, we talk about Zollicoffer. Zollicoffer was a gigantic loss to the Confederates. No one knows who he is because he
Yep.
died early. Guys like Samuel Garland, huge Confederate loss. No one knows who he is because he died at South Mountain. This is what robbed the Confederates of that talent coming up, and how you end up with Braxton Bragg and people who were lesser than they probably should have been. Confederates lost a ton of young and up and coming talent
Yeah.
on that secondary level that cost them later in the war. Zollicoffer, huge loss. Garland, huge loss. But especially Zollicoffer,
Oh,
right?
yeah. I just looked up a picture of him. I'd never seen a picture of him before. Interesting individual.
You know,
Not how I thought he would look.
yeah, but that's how that was, And
Yeah, he's a huge loss early on for them. I was picturing the guy from what's that Trailer Park Boys with the big glasses.
oh, Bubbles.
Picturing Bubbles. Get that image out of your mind for Zollicoffer.
When I was living on Cape Cod, we used to host baseball players, and we had this one ball player from Nebraska, Chad, who was obsessed with that TV show.
Oh, really?
So we'd come home from games and sit there and watch the show. We'd sit there and drink beers. Don't tell me we're drinking beer, but we would sit there and watch that show all the time, and he would laugh and laugh and laugh. He actually works for a highly secured government job now, for like the CIA in Washington.
Wow.
So the baseball thing didn't work out, but he seems to land it okay. But yeah,
Wow.
Bubbles. But that's how kind of what he was. That's what Zollicoffer was. But again, when you're looking at these people, you didn't know what you had.
Yeah.
Claiborne obviously else, and we realized Claiborne wasn't the only guy killed. Frank, we know that there was a
Yeah.
bunch of other ones, but this is the point where it was later in the war, Franklin. But Mill Springs was early.
Yeah.
South Mountain was early.
Yeah.
If Garland and Zollicoffer live, they're going to command a least corps.
Yeah.
Garland is probably going to command a division at Antietam if he doesn't get killed. 3 days
Yeah.
later, 3 days from September 14th to the 17th, he's probably going to be a division command.
Yeah.
What people don't realize with Antietam was the communication was a disaster. I mean, John Bell Hood reports to Longstreet, right? When John Bell Hood wants troops to support him after he goes into towards the cornfield and where he goes to the East Woods,
Mhm.
he doesn't find Longstreet. He goes to try to find Jackson.
Yeah.
I need support. So that whole thing was all screwed up. So it depends on who you kind of got along with at the time.
Yeah.
But Garland I'll tell you right now, Garland survives South Mountain. He gets killed literally in the same place where Jesse Reno got killed.
Yeah.
Right there, right? He survives. He's going to be a division commander and a good one at Antietam. And who knows how that changes. But no one
Yeah.
knows who Garland is because he gets killed early and no one studies him.
Well, it's like Carney as well. Carney getting killed at Chantilly. Like, what
Yeah.
could have become with him? Like, he's probably one of the greater what ifs of the Civil War, him and Zollicoffer, because they're both very talented. And the thing that I realized, about so yesterday was the anniversary of Jackson's death. And the one thing that, I'm looking at him a little bit more now, and I'm seeing him as being like his loss is huge, obviously. Uh, Guelzo does a great job in discussing the Jackson-Lee relationship, especially in regards to how Jackson could write orders and how chaotic that made things at Gettysburg. And even into 1864, I was reading yesterday that, Lee is going at Ewell saying, like, do you not know what I want? And Ewell's like, no, I don't. Like, Ewell probably was like, I'm not Jackson, so stop writing orders as if I am. Lee had a tough time, I think, being able to adapt to that. And Ewell likewise had a tough time being able to adapt to orders that were not as clear. But the one thing that I don't know if people will agree with this, if I can explain it properly, but when you think that Jackson, so Claiborne is referred to Stonewall of the West.
Mm-hmm.
I think if Jackson hadn't died, he would have been on a similar trajectory to Claiborne, because the two of them were very similar in many ways. And that's why Claiborne is called Stonewall of the West. So I think if you look to how Claiborne, what happened with him, how he had his trajectory, you might have seen the same in Jackson as well, that he would have just kept getting better, like Claiborne did.
Well, I mean, that's the thing too, is you don't know that for sure, but
No, but I'm just saying, like, they were very similar. Humor and History said Kearney was a sad loss, but that was just one thing that I thought about with, like, because you see a lot of the anti-Jackson sentiment come out this time of year, which I'm kind of like, okay, just you can be anti-Jackson, but not right now, kind of thing.
Yeah, well, the Kearney's also Chantilly was big. Also, Stevens's was too.
Yeah, Isaac Stevens. Yeah,
and
is Isaac or Hazard?
Hazard is the son. Isaac is the father. They're both buried next to each other in Newport, Rhode Island, the same cemetery, Mary, as Gouverneur Kimball Warren, by the way.
Yep.
Right. And so if you look at how that played itself out, we've said before about Kearney. Kearney is destined. He was a rising star. Absolute rising star. He probably takes command. He's probably at least corps commander going forward.
Yeah.
After that whole thing, because
I think he eventually might have been given command of the army.
Well, maybe. I mean, you think about the fact that you're coming off of a second Manassas. Mm-hmm. Okay, bad day for mother, right? Chantilly, he does okay if he survives Chantilly. How does that play itself out when Lincoln's looking for people to replace Hooker after Chancellorsville? Yeah. Right? Who knows, right? Who knows?
So Hal asks, what do you think would have happened if Hayes had not been wounded across the field from Garland?
Well, Hayes commands the 23rd Ohio, right? And he's going up South Mountain. He's the one who gets into it with Garland, but he does get wounded. That's a big loss for them too, though. It certainly is. It's tough to say.
Yeah.
Because they win that battle. They push through and they end up getting past Fox's Gap and they get past Turner's Gap. And so yeah, that's another one when you think about it. He obviously doesn't get killed there, but it knocks him out. But South Mountain is a very understudied battle because it tends to be merged in with Antietam. They're 3 days apart, and unfortunately, if you think about it, the success the Union had in Crampton's Gap, is probably what led to Antietam, because Lee was ready to pull out. He was ready to take his ball in Operation GTFO and head back over the Potomac. But now, because McLaws gets stuck between the Union armies, he has to fall back to Sharpsburg because otherwise he's going to sacrifice all of McLaws's men.
Yeah.
So if they don't do as well down there, the South Gap, it's possible that Lee retreats and the team never happens. But going off on a long answer to a short question, but yeah, he's a big loss, no question.
Mm-hmm. And then AQ mentions Chantilly is very small in the middle of a busy area, but it's worth visiting. Was it? Oh, James said if Reynolds had accepted command is another what if.
Well, that was probably the ultimate bad career move right there. I'd imagine.
I mean, I get, like, you look at how Reynolds is looking at how McClellan was treated, how Burnside, how Hooker, he's looking at all that. And he's realizing that it's partly because, I mean, Burnside was not a good general. He was very incompetent. Better off having someone telling him what to do, kind of thing. But, Reynolds' reason was that, he's kind of like, are you going to let me have autonomy and do what I want? And Lincoln's like, no. And Reynolds is like, well, then I don't want it. By the way, a guy named Meade, he would be great, I think, for command.
Well, the thing about it though is Meade was the right call there.
Oh, he was absolutely.
I mean, given the choice between Reynolds and Meade, I would take Meade anyway. I would. I just would, because Meade, nothing against Reynolds, but again, Reynolds didn't have the experience overall that Meade did. When you look at it, Reynolds was pulled back to Pennsylvania. He missed Antietam because Andrew Curtin wanted him guarding the state of Pennsylvania. Right. I mean, it's how Hooker ends up in the First Corps. I mean, how Meade ends up as a subordinate.
Yeah.
I would given the choice, again, 50-50 being our hindsight, Reynolds doesn't think he's going to be killed. No one thinks they're going to be killed.
No.
But again, if you're meddling and you see that parade of generals roll by, McClellan, Burnside, Hooker, now he's gone. You're next.
You realize that you are, if something bad happens, you are going to be the one that on the chopping block, no matter what your decisions are. But I think post Gettysburg was when Lincoln realized, like, ooh, maybe I do need to give these guys a little bit more autonomy. They had a lot of autonomy out west because of how far they were away. But for some reason, the Army of the Potomac is like, it's like micromanaging almost in a way. And I get why that ticked them off, because it's like, we're the ones with military training, back off and let us do our job.
Well, think about it, big picture for a second. We talk about this. Is you're John Reynolds and you see the way in your mind, whether right or wrong, how people like Hooker were treated, Burnside was treated, even McClellan was treated for that matter, right?
Yeah.
And you see people like Franz Sigel being put in charge.
Yeah.
Okay. And you see things like that. It's like, of course, you're going to question what's the best, with him. What's in it for me? What's better for me? I think whoever, being a Army of the Potomac general was like being a drummer in Spinal Tap at that point. You weren't going to last long. It'd be cool if you knew that one.
No, I don't.
See?
No. Another one, Fragile X Factor. Awesome name. What if Lyon had survived Wilson's Creek?
Well, I mean, we did a thing on Wilson's Creek. He's another one. There's a lot of these young dudes who recklessly expose themselves and got themselves killed. But he's somebody. And what's interesting too was a lot of how those people would have played into the post-war, right?
Yep.
Lyon, obviously he takes the arsenal in St. Louis and he moves across the state, and he does a lot of good things in Missouri. But at the end of the day, you'll never know, because he's going to die an obscure person,
Yeah. James said, this is a great analogy. The East was the shop window. The West was the warehouse.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
Well, we always say the East is the quarterback and the West is the lineman. Yeah. But it's the same concept. But that's kind of how it all rolls. But at the end of the day, what's great about the Civil War is, and a lot of people don't like to do this, it is the ultimate what if. You can play this game all day. And people like to say, well, let's only talk about what actually happened. Well, that's okay.
But it shows that, you're looking at somebody that you studied, and how would they change in this situation. And that's why the what if game is fun to play, because it's just gives you a chance to talk about them, like what if this had happened, like, and this is why I think this, because you're able to reference examples from what actually happened and apply it to a different battle or a different campaign or whatever. Like, I think, Zollicoffer, obviously, Kearney is another one, with what if. Even, Albert Sidney Johnston gets a little bit overplayed the same way that Jackson does, because Albert Sidney Johnston is a huge loss, but I think Zollicoffer is an equally bad loss as well.
Well, yes, potentially. Again, that's one of those Kurt Cobain things, right?
Yeah, that's what Albert Sidney Johnston gets caught up in that.
No, I think Zollicoffer does. I think because Zollicoffer is still young and he's still up and coming, and he's a great what if loss. But again, he could have fallen on his dick like any of these other guys. You never know. Mm-hmm. But he could have been good, but you'll never know. What's great about Kurt Cobain is he'll never get old. He'll never put out a greatest hits album. He's not gonna make a fool out of himself like Axl Rose, fat, bloated on the stage, jumping around. So you'll always look back at the not only good he was, what he could have been, but people forget about the downside. Albert Sidney Johnston, I think, for the most part, and some people disagree with this, but I think he was somebody who would have been a more stable general to at least contend a little bit with Grant and Sherman in the West. Doesn't mean he would have, but he had the stripes, he had the cachet. He had they call it the duende, whatever the hell that means. He had that. He had that part of him that people looked to him as being a leader, where Zollicoffer was going to grow into that, but we'll never know.
No,
Well,
and I
no,
think
no.
Albert Sidney Johnson too was given a mess of an army. When you look at the Army of Tennessee, it's a mess. How Davis is putting in the top positions the people he knows, not necessarily good for command, and the ones
Mhm.
that he doesn't know or doesn't like are given lower command, and they should have been higher up. Luckily, Albert Sidney Johnson was talented, and he was also Davis's friend, so that was like kind of luck right there. And yeah, James mentions Johnson's relationship with Davis. That's why he gets the command. But luckily, Johnson knows what he's doing. Davis did feel, I think, that he was a little bit, anybody that got too friendly with Beauregard, Davis was like, don't be friendly with him. That's why
Yeah.
he didn't like Joseph E. Johnson's relationship with Beauregard. Davis is like, you are giving that man too much credit. You need to be an actual commander. And Joseph E. Johnson is like, but I like what he's suggesting that we do. Like, what am I supposed to do? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, well, exactly. But I mean, but Sidney Johnson, I mean, don't forget he was famously playing the piano as his wife was playing the piano in Los Angeles with old Winnie Boy
Ugh.
and Low Armistead, right? Um, you know, probably playing the Friendlies theme song, But he's there, so he had history with Mexico, and he had history, so he came into the war as a known commodity. A lot of these
Mhm.
guys, Claiborne, Zollicoffer, they grew into it. And
Yeah.
in the case like Zollicoffer or Garland, since we mentioned him before, is they were cut the nip in the bud before they could
Yeah.
show it, either whether they could show they were great or they sucked. Right? They were their first round draft pick, or actually, like the lower round draft pick, who
Yeah.
suddenly showed promise. They're going to make the team. They could be good, and they blow their knee out, and they're done. And you'll never
Yeah.
know. You'll never
Yeah.
know, right?
I was
Yeah.
gonna say one from Frank. I wonder if Hood would have been looked upon a better light if he had died at Chickamauga or Atlanta.
Well, if Hood had died
At
At
Chickamauga.
Chickamauga, he'd be a rock star. I mean,
He'd
he
be like
would.
Jackson.
I mean, well, yeah. I mean, he probably would, but that's the same for a lot of these guys. I mean, people don't realize how close Lee came to being killed at Second Manassas. A bullet whizzed right by his ear.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a rock star now. If he got killed at Second Manassas and they win the battle in spite of him, oh my God, you can imagine.
Ugh.
That's the truth though. And a lot of people stayed on too long,
Yeah.
and they kind of prove themselves to be, as silly as it sounds. If Henry Halleck gets killed early, he'd
Yeah.
be looked upon today as a great potential leader.
But that's a little weird.
But that's what happens though,
Yeah.
and that's why you'll never know what a Zollicoffer or a Garland could have grown into.
Yeah.
But you can only look at the work you have in front of you.
Every time you say
Respect.
Garland, I think you're going to say Garnett.
No, no, our poor Garnett's not going to this conversation. But Garland is a guy, again, he had the leadership of his men. He was killed early, and it's unfortunate he got killed. And the other one we haven't really talked about on the Union side is Jesse Reno.
Yeah.
Because he's a guy, he got killed by the incompetence of some of my fellow Massachusetts men,
Yeah.
unfortunately, where he rides up and he sends troops up the hill that when we walked up that time and said, see if there's Confederates there. They come back, they say, no, there's nobody up there. Reno rolls in. The Confederates that the mass guys missed, killed him.
Wow.
And he was someone he was like a Carney. He was destined for greatness.
Yeah.
Potentially anyway. But that's what you get when you study this. You look at these battles and you look at the people who fall off. And it's easy to imagine what these guys could have grown into.
Yeah.
I mean,
well,
it's just
the
human
same,
nature.
same with when we were over at Eddie's on Friday night for happy hour. We decided that one of the episodes that we're going to do probably in September or late August is an episode because of the anniversary of the Battle of Atlanta. General James Burbsy McPherson. Look at his life, because he's one of these ones that gets killed in 1864 at the Battle of Atlanta. And Sherman, very distraught, very upset by it, to the point where Sherman says, this is a guy that could have been president.
He probably would have been, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, look at some of the guys, the Civil War guys who came out of the Civil War, guys like McKinley, guys like Hayes we talked about, obviously Grant, but it wouldn't have been too far to imagine a guy like James McPherson would have been next, because he was a rising star in the country. Absolutely.
Oh, he's so respected, and his death, like Hood was really upset about his death. Because they went to West Point together. And actually, funny enough, it was McPherson that told Sherman, like, he's an idiot.
Well,
When Sherman's like, what guy am I going up against? And Sherman's like, basically you're going up against the class clown. Like,
yeah.
like and Howard said that was the one time that Howard kind of threw an insult at someone, said that Hood was stupid to his wife.
Well, I don't know if I wouldn't say I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't say it
No,
was
but
stupid.
that,
You know, I mean, you know, I mean, he moved to Texas because he knew that Texas was going to secede.
yeah,
You know, the thing about Hood is that you look at, you want to say overstaying your welcome a little bit, right?
yeah,
Where he was the classic can't read the room guy as far as not knowing what style to fight. I mean, you look at what he did at Chickamauga was fantastic.
oh yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you look, his injury here at Gettysburg changed the whole game plan for the
yep.
Confederacy. I mean, who's to say if he lives, you know, Evander Law doesn't take control.
Kevin Bacon.
Kevin Bacon, right? And that's a gigantic loss. Now Franklin, that it is what it is. You know, Spring Hill, it is what it is, I guess. But I mean, when you look at what he did, he almost was able to pull Sherman away for the March of the Sea. He
Yeah.
almost did it.
But Sherman was like, nope.
He was persistent, and he wanted
Yeah.
to do his march, and so he ended up.
But he sends Thomas after him, which I think shows the level of trust that Sherman finally had in Thomas and always should have had
Yeah,
in him.
no. Well, he
And
sends Thomas to Nashville.
yeah, but he knows that Hood's going to go to Nashville. I think he had kind of, he's
No,
like,
he probably figured that out. But
so
again,
this is what he's going to do. I know his game plan. Kind of like, he's not going to chase me.
no,
He's,
he. Well, I think he thought he was going to chase him, though. I think he thought, realistically speaking, he was going to end up in a situation where he was going to uh, draw him away, and he probably would have if things worked out well. I mean, the person who you really who doesn't get enough credit is Schofield here,
yeah.
right? You know, John Schofield is the one who basically gets assigned to go chase Hood, to go meet up with Hood. I mean, to go meet up with um with Thomas up in Nashville to strengthen that army. He's the one who ends up.
Yeah, yeah, that it was Schofield.
And
That's
he
right. It was
and so
Schofield.
as easy as it is to make fun of Hood for Spring Hill for sleeping when the alarm went off and lost control of the Union Army,
through the alarm.
you got to give credit to Schofield.
Yeah.
Right? You do. Because he's the one he probably deserves more credit for Spring Hill than Hood gets for being ripped on Spring Hill.
Yep.
Now, Franklin, again, Schofield's in Franklin. You know, he's rebuilding that bridge. He's trying to get his men over to get to Nashville. Hood knows the clock is ticking. He ain't got the time. He has to push forward and attack him there. Otherwise, he's going to lose the entire army, and then they're going to merge with Thomas, and then you got a real friggin' problem. Now you got both the armies you got to fight.
Yeah.
He felt it made more sense to fight Schofield at Franklin. My odds are better than trying to deal with both him and Thomas, because he knew he was going to have to fight one of them. That was the best shot. Unfortunately, he chose poorly. He was screwed either way. So I don't buy into the ripping on Hood for Franklin. I never really have. I think it's more of a case of Schofield being better.
Well, you don't mean Franklin, you mean Spring Hill.
For Franklin.
Franklin as well. I mean, I think Schofield definitely deserves more credit. I don't think the subordinates who were blamed for Franklin, like, because obviously Cleburne is heavily blamed for that. And I think he and two, I mean, we know people who don't like the attention that Cleburne gets for Franklin. But we're talking about probably the best Confederate general in the Western theater.
No, he is. Cleburne is to Franklin as Chamberlain is to Gettysburg. And I get that. I mean, they both were very important in what they did. They both was extremely instrumental to their success of their armies, but they get a lot of credit. They get a lot of credit. And Otho Strahl, John Adams, States Rights Gist. There's a lot of people who died there too, who don't get the credit. And that's why people get a little bit.
I get it. I get it. And I think too, like, I mean, admittedly, I know more about Cleburne and Granbury than I do about Otho Strahl and States Rights, and Adams as well. And I want to learn more about them. But I mean, Cleburne, when you're looking at the big picture, he is one of the best that they had.
I absolutely agree with that. I don't think there's any question about that. I think he's I think he's somebody who probably, if they had taken the leash off him earlier, he probably would have been better things. We talked about before, the Irish thing was his glass ceiling. The
Emancipation.
Well, the Irish thing was his glass ceiling. It was. He wasn't going to get above that anyway. But the emancipation thing was the nail in the coffin. That was it.
Yeah. Hal says Spring Hill was an example of the final amalgamation of the volunteer with the regular into a capable professional military. Schofield also deserves credit for knowing and trusting his subordinates. Yeah. Schofield is one of these guys you don't really. He's like Slocum, kind of flies under the radar, but he does great things.
Yeah. I mean, again, it goes back to your personal opinions, what you think of these people at the end of the day. I'm more of the Schofield did well versus Hood did bad school of thoughts, admittedly. I'm not sure. I don't blame Claiborne for Spring Hill. There's a million. Again, if you're going to blame somebody, you got to blame Hood because the buck stops here. He's the man in the big chair. But at the end of the day, sometimes the other team wins.
Yeah. And Grant mentions that story of wounded Reno going to headquarters of Sturgis before dying, and then D.H. Hill's comments about Reno's death have always stuck with me.
Yeah. Reno, you're talking some big losses. But I mean, if you're focused on Gettysburg, you're focused on things like that, you're not going to even know who.
You're not going to know who they are. Who was the one that was killed at Bell Plantation?
Oh, that was Stephen Ramseur.
Yeah, he's another one.
And Stephen Dodson Ramseur. I mean, that's a sad story because his wife just had a daughter.
Yeah.
And he pinned a heart onto his chest for his newborn daughter for her, and he gets killed right at the Bell Plantation at the Battle of Cedar Creek. So there's a lot of that. And that was a little later in the war. That was the Valley campaign with Sheridan. But again, what the war did at the end of the day was steal away a lot of potential people who could have done big things in the post-war.
Yep. Another one was, and this was the first episode we did about it, General, was William Hames Lytle at Chickamauga.
Yeah, exactly.
He was like, if Leonardo DiCaprio had been killed in battle, that's what he was. He was famous. Like,
yeah, no, he was a big person, but we can really shut this down here pretty soon.
Yeah.
It's already 11:15. Time flew this time.
Yeah,
stuff to do today.
We do. One last question here. How about Spring Hill being an example of Forrest as a raider versus all-around cavalryman?
Yeah, well, that was the thing too, is people don't realize that Nathan Bedford Forrest is part of it. I'm pretty sure there's still a spring called like a Forrest Ford or Forrest Crossing or something at Spring Hill that's still to this day where his men crossed. Mm-hmm. But Forrest is the one, speaking of Forrest, who really blamed Claiborne. He was the one who went to Hood and said it's the leprechaun's fault. Blame him. But he had his fingers pointed.
But you know why that was, right?
Oh, it's a million, of course.
Yeah, a million reasons. One of them being the emancipation, because that's Forrest's business.
Right. But that was the thing too, is so a lot of the anti-Claiborne people, all the pro-Forrest people see that, but Forrest was instrumental in the old blame game. And a lot of it is because he was a cavalry and he should have been part of knowing where Schofield was too. Yeah. So it's easy to kind of blame other people. Like when you screw up at work and you blame the other people, that's the smart play.
Yeah. Well, there is that painting that what's his face did where it looks like Forrest and Claiborne are riding and Forrest is going like this. It looks like he's about to slap him across the face.
Oh yeah.
No, you see, the painting I'm talking about where he's like looks like this and Claiborne's like, oh.
Yeah, definitely. All right, why don't we jump off? So we got stuff we got to do today. So we are going to be doing an episode on John Gibbon here in a couple of weeks. Next weekend is we are in Virginia, and the following week is Memorial Day. So we're going to take a week off and do that following week. So check out the episode we just did on Newmarket. That was fun to do. It's a very, very good story overall to study, and so hopefully people check that out.
And we also have an episode about the Battle of Yellow Tavern, the anniversary, which is today, so you can check that one out as well. Hi, Glow Jam, great to see you.
Oh, hey, what's going on? He's just going to cut us at the very end here. So,
he was out fishing.
Oh, okay. Good. Well, gotta do your fishing. Hope you got some. So, all right. So off we go. So, any final words from you before we jump off?
Thanks for bringing it for the episode of Newmarket, as you always do, and thanks for everybody who popped on with us today to this silly little live stream that we do Saturdays, Sundays at 10:00. We really appreciate it. All the comments, the questions, and all that. That's what drives the discussion.
We appreciate people jumping on and talking about it. I mean, and it's good when people add comments and add questions and talk about it too, because a lot of time what it does is it takes the direction in a different direction. We don't have an agenda when we come on this. No. We just kind of sit on the bar stools and talk.
Yeah.
And that's what's cool about this. So if you do come to Gettysburg, definitely reach out to us, because we
Yep.
always want to do this in person with anybody. We've ran into a lot of fun people recently. So definitely check that out. So anyway, so hopefully you guys have a good rest of the weekend. It's sunny here on Sunday, so we're gonna have a Sunday fun day here today. Go probably empty some glasses somewhere in town.
Yep.
Probably, to carry you home, put you in a shopping cart again.
I have to work tomorrow. I have to get up at 5.
I never